the human beings were, the precious lives were lost so many, but the animals were found unharmed. Along India's Cuddalore coast, where thousands of people perished, the Indo-Asian News Service reported that buffaloes, goats and dogs were found unharmed. I'd like to give you some more, like it has been reported in Sri Lanka, in the town of Dikwela, the nocturnal bats were frantically flying before the tsunami, and Alan Reynolds, the director for science and exploration at the Brown Zoo-based Wildlife Conservation Society in New York, says animals can sense impending danger by detecting subtle and abrupt shifts in the environment. In Japan, which is one of the world's most earthquake-prone countries, the researchers have found, they studied that animals, in hopes of discovering what they hear or feel before the earth shakes, they hope that animals may be used as a prediction tool. Alan says earthquakes bring vibrational changes on land and in water, while storms cause electromagnetic changes in the atmosphere. He also said some animals have acute sense of hearing and smell that allow them to determine something coming towards them long before humans might know that something is there. By knowing all this, what is our conclusion? Do we agree the animals are superior than human in their sensory abilities? If we agree, are we going to give them the status, the animals, what they deserve, and work for their conservation and protection of animals? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senpo, please.
Presentation. In your presentation, you were told tsunami was new to South Pacific region and as well as the South Asia. But my opinion is tsunami is not new one to us, because what you can say? 3,000 years ago, the southern part of Tamil Nadu experienced tsunami. For that, lot of hints in Tamil literature. Thank you.
I think that's a comment. Okay, Dr. Sheriff, please.
Dr. Morgan said humans are better. Dr. Kalaris is telling monkeys are better. Who are better, madam?
That is,
as a person, I tend to believe that they have sensory abilities which we can't. But with my scientific training, I find it hard to accept the scientific basis of these findings, because not only case control study, then we have to have statistical difference, and then, whether it is a chance or whether it is truly they are sensing, and also the procedural difficulty. How do we know what they are thinking as we think they are thinking? And do you think there is any solution to the dilemma? How do we know that what they are thinking as we are thinking? Is it possible to address that issue, in your opinion?
in my opinion, I think I mentioned that it is very difficult because of the animal behavior and the communication cannot be given. I have mentioned in my paper that it is difficult to have a systematic control over their behavior since they show loss of behavior, as I mentioned many times. Thank you, sir.
It's a good example of a specific case where we could have learnt from animal behaviour, but it's only one example of the more general important point that humans must learn from ecological behaviour and follow the ecological constraints in our own behaviour. So I think we do and can and should learn from ecology and live that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think it would be, in fact, another case for what was suggested, this repository of cultural ethics, cultural knowledge. I've heard also many anecdotes like this, and it's to record these and document, and then to put this in a scientific manner is very important. Thank you. Okay. So the next speaker is Mary Rani on the benefits and ethical limits of transgenic animals.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think this topic is going to be very interesting since we are going to talk about benefits and ethical limits of transgenic animals. I am Sister Mary Josephine Rani and Dr. Selva Nayagam. Since life began, genes have crossed the boundaries of related and unrelated species in nature. The major areas of research and development in biotechnology are maturing at a rapid rate. Breakthrough in molecular biology brought us a new technique called genetic engineering. The genes are selected to enhance the beneficial qualities in plants and animals. Genetic engineering of animals involves the addition and deletion of DNA of an animal in order to change its character. Why are genetically modified animals produced? It is for various purposes: to identify, isolate the genes, and to understand its function and regulations. It's for research models of human diseases, for xenotransplant, for pharmaceutical purposes, and also to improve livestock. We'll just run through the benefits derived out of this transgenic animals. From this genetic engineering, transgenic animals, we can get disease-resistant animals. It is used for gene therapy, for industrial application purposes, for toxicity sensitivity test, for making animal models, for biofarming, xenotransplantation, improve productivity to make pet animals, example glowfish, onco mouse, enviro pig, and cattle for healthier meat, and mosquito which is resistant to malaria. And we see what is the meaning and what it implies: production of disease-resistant animal. Now scientists are attempting to produce disease-resistant animals such as influenza-resistant pigs. For gene therapy, the potentials for treatments of about 5,000 named genetic disorders are huge, and transgenic animals could play a vital role. Industrial application: after genetic modification, the goat began to manufacture silk along with the milk and secrete tiny silk strands. The scientist also can create a light, tough, and flexible material that could be used in various industrial purposes. The biofarming: the transgenic animals have the ability to produce complex, biologically active, recombinant protein in an efficient and economic manner. Also, these transgenic animals are used in the toxicity test. Transgenic animals have been produced for chemical toxicity test. And for xenotransplantation, the use of animal organs for human transplantation is seriously being considered. Genetically modified pigs, for example, will help to inhibit hyperacute rejection when the pig organs are transplanted into humans. Onco mouse: a mouse was genetically modified to develop a human cancer. This was intended to further research into human cancers. Enviro pig: this Enviro pig project aims to produce an environmentally friendly pig whose waste has a largely reduced phosphorus content. This is going to reduce water and land pollution. Mosquitoes are modified. If these mosquitoes could be modified and made resistant to the malarial parasite and then released into the environment, it is going to replace the existing susceptible ones. Then many people will be prevented from dying of malaria. the last. Genetic modification of pets. Pet dogs especially are made after 188 failed attempts to make, they made pet dogs. Later on, fishes also are now being made as a pet. Fishes are being genetically modified to grow in dark and sold as pet. Allergy-free cats, a company called Transgenic Genes was working from 2001 to remove the allergen genes from cats. Animals for the lab use, many different mice models mimicking human diseases are possessing relevant human receptor sites are used in studying the mechanism by which disorders are caused. Animal models for diabetes mellitus. In recent years, molecular biological techniques have produced a large number of new animal models for the study of diabetes, improving productivity. Genetically modified animals are intended to produce better qualities of milk, meat, and silk. And coming to the ethical concern, we know what ethics is and what is bioethics. I think I need not say, all of us are now well versed about ethical concern and ethical needs. Bioethics, we can understand, or it can be defined as the systemic study of human conduct in the area of life science and health science, keeping in view the moral values and principles existing during particular period. The production of genetically modified animals and its consequences, even though the benefits are large, along with the benefits, it also brings some disaster. And the techniques used in genetic modification is super-ovulation, laparotomy, and pro-nuclear microinjection, and we will see the animal welfare. This is the technique by which how the animals are modified to suit our environment and our purposes. Production of genetically modified animal and its consequences. By super-ovulation and laparotomy, this laparotomy can cause post-operative pain, and super-ovulation can cause discomfort to the animals. Sometimes the donor females are mated when they are very young, and this can be very stressful. Apart from the direct effect of the technique involved, sometimes death can occur during development or post-natally. By the process called pro-nuclear microinjection, they have tried and they have given a statistics which shows about 1,360 out of 1,585 embryos only survived, and after implanting, only 29% survived to weaning, and only 3 to 11% were successful. So coming to the animal welfare, what animals suffer and what is the case with regard to these animals' pain. Animals experiences deleterious effect both during and after procedures. When mutation, gene deletion, insertion produces abnormalities in animals, especially in large animals, miscarriages cause distress. Okay, we will see now a little the perils of genetic modification. Okay, this super pig. This super pig was engineered with the human growth hormone, and this pig seems to suffer from arthritis, and it is ulcerous, blind, and impotent. The super salmon was engineered, but it is engineered with grow fast gene from another fish, but it might also escape from their marine breeding pens and breed with natural stocks, reducing the number of wild species. The successful story, the clone of Dolly the sheep, a big success story, are 8 times likely to die at birth compared with the normal lambs. Cats, goats, fish, and other animals that can easily pose the greatest risk of escaping and crossbreeding. Genetically engineered insects, shellfish, and fish, and other animals that can easily escape becomes particular concern, especially if they are more successful at reproduction than their natural counterpart. in genetic animals developed for human consumption, there is a low probability that a new proteins expressed when genes are inserted from another species might trigger allergic or hypersensitive reaction. Transgenic animals that do survive don't express the inserted genes properly, often resulting in anatomical, physiological, and behavioral abnormalities. We need to ask 3 important questions. Do we, as humans, have the right to alter the genetic composition of another animal? Next one is, what is the point of researching on animals when they are so different from us? Finally, are we playing with God and nature? There are also some objections for these genetically transformed organisms, especially these genetic animals can create particular problem for some religious group, especially for Muslims, Sikh and Hindus. It would be forbidden to eat food containing genetic material from animals whose flesh is forbidden to eat. Many appear to be uneasy about the transfer of genetic material from and into animals, though there seems little concern that insulin for treating diabetes is now produced by inserting copies of human gene into microorganism. This suggests that this is an involvement of animal rather than crossing of species boundaries, which is felt to be morally problematic. And finally, by the genetic modification, we produce identical animals. The deliberate production of genetically identical animal is wrong because it failed to produce the unique and individuality of animals, particularly if this aim is the production of line uniformity. There are so many concerns over human, animal and environment, especially with regard to transfer of genes and the ethical concerns. There are ethical concerns with regard to the modified animals. There is a concern that risk from the use of retrovirus as DNA vector, concern about possible risk to human and animal health from consumption of genetically modified animals and their products. There is a concern about risk that drug-resistant gene marker used in some genetic engineering procedures might be transferred and expressed with undesired effect. Concern that animal biotechnology might narrow the gene pool and reduce gene diversity, producing monoculture. Concerns that animal bioengineered in biomedical research to be models of human disease might escape and infect the human and animal population, or might generate new and more resistant strains of genes of disease. Concerns that organs from genetically modified animals might transmit vital diseases if in human transplant surgery. Concerns that genetically modified animals might be accidentally or deliberately released into the environment may cause various forms of ecological disaster. Finally, genetically modified mice and other animals could create pests that would be much more difficult to eliminate. The problem of killer bees was a result of laboratory organism that escaped into the wild. In xenotransplantation, it's a concern about risk that human recipient of animal organ might become infected with animal vital diseases, which might often infect the wider population. Then coming to conclusion, producing transgenic animals are seen as a fundamental transgression of the integrity of animals. Directly modifying animals' genetic material can produce unpredictable results. There is a need for greater commitment to monitoring, collecting and reporting data on adverse side effects of genetic modification. Negative effects caused by genetic modification should not be tolerated, and every effort should be made to minimize such efforts. Also, we have no right to use animals in the way that pleases us just because we are members of a different species. Their feelings, interest, and capacity for pain and pleasure should be taken into account. Also, I feel bioethics also shouldn't be allowed to strangulate technical research, while at the same time, the latter cannot be allowed to proceed unscrutinized. Let us not forget that moral goodness of any progress is measured by its benefit to humankind, and benefits of biotechnology definitely must overweigh the burden. We are now challenged to make more decisions than in the past. The more possibilities we have, the more decisions we have to make. People need to be taught more about how to make decisions, and the education system should accommodate this need of modern life. We are only caretakers and not masters. Let us guard vigilantly.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Amir, please.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Certainly I agree with you, we are only caretakers, but every time science tries to leap forward, the question of the balance between playing God and caretaker, etc., comes up. When the mule was breeded, we were playing with nature also. But that was happening in the fields and not in the genetics lab. But the questions of ethics was also there. I mean, we were altering the nature, wasn't it? It was happening in the fields, but not in sterile labs. So what's the difference now that it's happening according to scientific principles, etc., and on our own, in our own ways? Man has been using nature for a long time. Since forever. We've been using animals, we've been using plants, etc., and people seem to have been adapting to that, accepting that. So when we do that in genetic labs, why is that different?
See, even in the past we had lots of rules and regulation, but as the time goes on, there is lot of improvement. Same way in the use of technology and science. Now people are now making use of technology to benefit also for the adverse effect. For example, now the headless embryos are cloned now. They say if the head is not present, if the brain is not present, they have no right. So they produce now headless embryos. So after the production, they take out the organs like heart, kidney, and then they start donating, and also they do business. It is not ethical, I believe. This type of advancement is not advertised in this field.
Okay, Maud, please, last comment.
That was quite interesting. I'm glad you put up the last slide where you cautioned that there has to be a balance between technological advancements and the fear that bioethics and a lot of these considerations will strangulate the procedure. As regards to the headless embryos, I think that's more conceptual than actually happening.
Yes.
At the moment, there's a lot of controversy about stem cell technology and the use of embryos, and just a scenario where there has been a question, I think, that has been debated for a long time in the UK, in the US, and some other countries around the world. What does one do with the excess embryos that are created in artificial for ART? Does it just go down the sink, or can they be put to better use? And we had a dialogue in Malaysia some time ago about this, rather than creating headless embryos, about the embryos that existed. And you'd be surprised as to the opinions that people were giving. There was an invitation to people from the NGOs, from the scientific community, from the clinical medical community, lawyers, as well as religious groups. And overall, quite a number of religious groups or individuals felt that, like the Muslims, for example, would you prohibit using embryos for therapeutic cloning? And as I understood it, for them, the process of ensoulment, when the soul actually is put into that being, it's at 120 days. So if it's an excess embryo, and it can be actually utilized as long as it is used before 120 days, that is allowable. So there are ways of this, rather than having to create something that you can harvest organs from and things like that. That's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Many issues were raised, I think, which will come up again. There's a few more papers on animal ethics. The next paper is by Honbipa Chanakul on science and technology and the supernatural in contemporary Thai novels. So I look forward to learning that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I'm Pauripa. My topic is science, technology, and the supernatural in contemporary Thai novels. I felt it's quite remote from the focus of this meeting. However, since it's included in the program, so I hope you'll find some interesting points in the following presentation. This topic is my research of the PhD program at Chulalongkorn University. The contents of this presentation are some primary findings. My research questions are: what are the real causes of obstructed scientific thought promotion in Thai society? Can Thai people neglect ideas about the supernatural and accept scientific rules? And does the supernatural have any special function for Thai people, so it is inherited and remained endlessly in Thai society? Oh, sorry. Okay. My research areas are 20 contemporary Thai novels published during 1987 to 2003. I began in the year 1987. Since that year, the Thai government at that time started to implement the sixth economic and social development plan, which focused on applying science and technology to development processes. Another condition of the selected novels is its main contents have to concern science, technology, and the supernatural. Now, what are found in the study novels are most of the study novels promote scientific thoughts or thinking. Some novels negatively criticize ideas and practices concerning the supernatural, and few novels propose neutral thoughts about science, technology, and the supernatural that can cause both advantages and disadvantages. It could be concluded that the overall reflections are Educated Thai university graduates think scientifically and neglect ideas or beliefs about the supernatural. But some people, both educated and uneducated, still practice some kinds of supernatural activities as cultural rituals or for mental reasons. Then let's see the causes of practicing supernatural activities in Thai society. The most found reason is as local or community socialized activity. Next, as personal consolation or aware of problem solving. And some supernatural practices are misguidedly added to Buddhist teachings or rites. Sorry. Sorry. Then, what concepts of science, technology, and the supernatural in Thai society are? For science and technology first, there are formally accepted ideas of sophisticated Thais in metropolis. They seem to be imported knowledge and for professionals in particular. And science and technology are alien, belong to the specialist, expensive and difficult to acquire. Now, what's about the supernatural? In the study novel, The Supernatural, which is most criticized, is black magic. It was shown harmful and offensive, always aimed to hurt others. It reflected that related to some Buddhist rites, which may destroy some bad supernatural forces. Although it seems negatively, it is the local knowledge for problem solving, easy to acquire and with low expenses. Next, let's see the expectations of Thai novelists that's found in the study novels. Some authors hope that the supernatural would be scientifically proved and explained, and would equally perform important roles as science and technology in future. Now, come to my conclusions. But before proposing them, I'd like to remark 2 points from my already addressed information. First, as I stated that sophisticated Thais thought scientifically, didn't believe the supernatural. On the contrary, Thai rural people rely on the supernatural a lot. So, 2 questions here are: whether scientific thought is subject to environment, and can it flourish in remote areas among medium or low educated people? My proposed answer is scientific thought is not subject to environment, but ineffective education is the main reason of the misguided value of science, technology, and the supernatural in Thai society. The second point is It is seen that local cultures and Buddhism have very important roles in Thai living, especially of rural people. Then are the obstacles of promotions of science and technology ideas? I like to reply that there are not. On the contrary, it will be very effective procedures if the policymakers can design any promotions which will compromising to both dominant factors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it relates to a discussion yesterday we had on religion and science. So your conclusion is it's not the lack of science and technology is not a problem of religion, it's an issue of a lack of education. We have time for a question. So, does anyone have a question? Yes?
Thank you for your interesting presentation. When you say ineffective education, which leads to the ideas and the notions about science, technology, I was wondering how you feel about when it is said that imagination is more important than knowledge, as said by Einstein. So, maybe they are imagining something which may not fit with our notion of what is right about science or technology or supernatural, but in a way, is it not curbing the freedom of expression of the men and women of literature if we say that it is ineffective education which leads to this kind of ideas?
Sorry, I can't catch your word clearly. Is you ask that imagination
is more important than knowledge? And that's a loaded statement.
I said that,
Yep.
but it's not appear in my study novels. But as you know that imagination is the main, maybe the beginning of literature or novels. What I like to say here is what I found in the study literatures is they reflect ideas, images, or what I found quite actual to the real events in Thai society. So I think imagination is the devices of the writer to tell the truth or like to communicate what is actually in the real society.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so the next page.
Now, first of all, I'm, as has just been indicated, in transition between two institutions. So it's going to be very interesting tonight when I talk. But I'm going to talk now about what has been happening with UNESCO over the last probably 6 months that I've been involved with it, and about some of the alternatives or options that we have for this. Now, at the beginning of last year, there was a meeting of the International Union of Biological Sciences, and it was held in Cairo. And at this particular place, there was discussion about some of the major issues that are facing the world today. And no surprising, these are things such as pollution, global climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the effects of GE. Kind of interesting. Now, this was actually done on a day when the conference wasn't working. It was mid-afternoon, and I was in my wonderful building looking out across Cairo, and I took this photograph. Then I had a glass of distilled water, and this was the picture a little bit later in the same day. Now, this is Cairo, and you might say, well, Cairo is special because it's fairly polluted. But it's not particularly different to many of the places in the world that I've had the chance to go and view. and it is typical of what we call the pollution of our world. As far as global climate change is concerned, I've had the good fortune of spending time in Antarctica in the area such as there, and also looking at things such as the Vostok ice core. Now with this particular series of graphs up here, I spoke last year about these graphs which show changes of a cyclic nature in the temperature of the Earth. Now, I was talking about this in Beijing 2 days before I was putting this up. This is not my work, but it's work of colleagues. 2 days before I put this up, David Bellamy, who's a botanist from the UK, had spoken out saying that global climate change, in fact what he said was, which actually means global climate change is nonsense. But in fact, we now know that global climate change is very real and certainly is with us at this present time. This is the famous hockey stick diagram, and the top one looks at carbon dioxide emissions, the methane in the middle one, and nitrous oxide in the bottom one. If we have a look at this particular line through here, notice where it comes in at about 300 ppm of CO2. Now we've got it sitting way up here, so it's really moved up dramatically, and this is far beyond the sort of cyclicity that people like Bellamy ever envisaged happening. In a simple word, we are in real trouble at the present time. Here's another shot too showing what is going on. I put this up because I think it's important for us to understand what is happening to the world around us. Greenland ice cores. Again, these are very interesting. What this particular graph shows us, the dotted line is going to show what, if we had been scientists living and looking at it from a distance, we would have seen that this was the actual insolation trend for the temperature on Earth. In other words, going downhill. Around about 5,000 years ago, something happened, and the trend, which is the solid line, took off upwards. Now what was it? It was this. Pretty simple. We started to change the world in which we lived. Now I'm not going to go through all these. I won't even read them out. You're familiar with them, but they are very important points that indicate that things are going wrong. These are not imaginations, they are total facts. And this one here is kind of interesting too. It's the diagram which shows this part of the world up here, which is kept warm by the Gulf Stream. And there was that wonderful film that came out last year which talked a bit about things that may happen unless we're very careful. And this is the sort of thing that could happen to Europe in the late 21st century. It is not an impossibility at all. And of course the next question is, if this happens to Europe because of the loss of the Gulf Stream, where are the Europeans going to go? Now, effects of a relatively small rise in temperature in island nations, particularly in the Pacific, is going to be pretty impressive, and we're going to see these inundated with water. But more importantly, and again one of the amazing things that happens sometimes is people say we can get rid of excess CO2 by pumping it into the oceans. And in fact the oceans have always been seen to be infinite and wonderful places for us to get rid of all the rubbish we ever want to get rid of. One kind of fascinating thing about the oceans is the fact that the oceans survive, and things like coral reefs in the oceans survive because of the pH. The pH of oceans is ever so slightly alkaline. It's about 8, between 8 and 7, which means that calcium carbonate, the very fabric of coral reefs, can actually survive perfectly well. If we pump CO2 into the oceans, we increase this delicate balance by dropping the pH to something around about 6 or even 5.5, which means calcium carbonate is not an option unless you have very, very complicated biology to support it. So by pumping CO2 into the oceans, we may very well destroy the very things we're trying to save. And we couple this with greenhouse emissions as well. Now, not so long ago I had a friend a very wealthy woman who had a helicopter, and she was flying over one of the islands north of Auckland and took this photograph. It actually horrified everybody, because what these algal blooms are doing is they suck out from the oceans oxygen, and this is the effect of it. We get lots of dead fish. The algae may not be necessarily toxic, but what they do with the sea certainly is. So loss of biodiversity, the other issue, is not a remote possibility. These are endangered species, and they're very special species, particularly in my part of the world. So they are endangered, they are very, very valuable, and they tell us a lot about the world in which we came from. So then, later on, after IUBS, and I was, for my sins, elected chairman of the IUBS Bioethics Committee, and as a consequence we put forward a recommendation to IBC in Paris in 2004. And this recommendation was submitted because the IBC wanted to develop universal norms on bioethics. This is how it was going to work. Here was me as the chair of that. We put our submission together, and it went across to IBC, and at the IBC meeting, this is what happened. Now there's a bird that does that. It's called the foo-foo bird, and I won't really explain anything more about that. But what happened at this meeting here, they decided that the best thing was to do was to split bioethics up. So people went off in one room and studied medical ethics, and they actually grabbed this term bioethics and took it for their own, and left the people who were concerned with the more holistic approach to go off and do something to do with the environment. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what is kind of interesting about the submission that the International Union made was we put up these things here as fundamentals in any set of norms, but I want to only look at one of them, and this is of real relevance here in light of what we've been talking about, and that is human dignity. Because we had the Japanese delegation stand up and say that this is a Western concept. Not that we're going to oppose you, however, but we can't really define it from a Japanese perspective. This came from Professor Ida. Now, I spoke about this very thing in Beijing last year in September, and there was a delegation of Japanese to see me at the end of it. And they said, Ida doesn't know what he's talking about. He is not a biologist. He's a lawyer. I think he was a lawyer. So I'm not quite sure. I said, look, it's not my problem. It's not an issue. However, I'm very interested in the fact that things such as human dignity, which I thought were universal, are not. That's maybe my problem. I want to now tell you something rather fascinating. This term bioethics was coined by Van Potter, not a long time ago at all, but in 1998. And when we use words that are coined by individuals, we should go back to their definitions. He says that bioethics is, quote, biology combined with diverse humanistic knowledge, forging a science that sets a system of medical and environmental priorities for acceptable survival. That's it. Medical and environmental. So what happened in Paris? I've given you some indication. They set up a new system. They were going to make bioethics medical ethics. How they can do that worries me, by the way. And here's what happened. The IBC will develop these universal norms solely as per medical ethics. And they set up another committee. And they put me on it. That's the way they shut people up. I actually made a submission. It was kind of interesting because I was so angry. Now, I don't very often get angry, but I was so angry the first night when this was going on, they decided they were going to cut it all up. And they said, we are going to do this very simply because it's too complicated and there's not enough time to do it all together in a holistic fashion. So why should we do what Van Potter thought we should do? So I wrote a page, and the Director General allowed me to speak, which apparently is very unusual. Normally you have to put it in 3 months in advance, but we did it. So then, what happens? You see, there's another committee. Off we go to. It's a subcommittee of ComEst, and we are going to develop these universal environmental norms and report back to UNESCO this year. That was the plan. And the medical people are in this back room all by themselves. God knows what they're doing. But nonetheless, they weren't talking to us. So why do we need universal norms when dealing with the environment? What is the reason for this? Well, there are things such as charismatic megafauna, and we have a very special relationship with nature. We love these things. They're spectacular. And we show this by the way in which we deal with our environment. This is stochastic urban accretion. The acronym is SUA. Now, if this was a movie, you'd see rats running around. And the photograph was taken by myself not too far from here. Does our management system sustain natural systems? Now, I show this picture all around the world. And I say to them, and I'll ask you this, What's odd about this animal? Quick answer, yes? How many feet it's got? No. That's the wrong answer, and that's very good. I didn't ask this lady to speak, by the way. It's nothing to do with that. Yes? Pardon?
It's not extinct yet.
Yes, and actually even worse than that, it's an adult. So presumably this can actually reproduce. The odd thing about this is there only is one nation in the world that would be pleased with this, and this is the French. Are there any other drivers for action? Well, there are. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, pointed out that unless we, that's scientists, do something about it, legislation will be put in place that will force us to do things. Now back to environmental ethics. We went to New Orleans, and this was where we met, the final meeting last year. I took this photograph and I put it on just recently because the water level is a bit higher than this now. But at ComEst in late last year, we finalised the draft protocol, which I've given a copy to Darryl, if we want to circulate later on. You can get an electronic copy. But up to now, there has been no formal acknowledgement from UNESCO, and we actually put it back in on the 1st of January 2005. So I don't know what happens, but it does worry me sometimes. What is environmental ethics? Well, one of the things we tried to do was to do a definition. And I've been talking in the States, in Norway, Germany, and in China. We had a workshop about defining this term, environmental ethics. So this was the words we put together. And it seems to have some consensus, and I put it in my paper. A philosophy where humanity is taken as part of, rather than separate from nature, and where humans adopt this role of environmental stewardship through which they do not needlessly exploit or destroy organisms. Okay. It'd be easy to function under an environmental ethic in an absence of conflict, but conflict arises when there are differing values, differing priorities, and differing rights. Do we need to reach agreement on these priorities and values? Well, we had a big water shortage in Auckland not so long ago, and I could spend a lot of time talking about it, but this was on the front page of the New Zealand Herald. Let's have a look at the key part to it. Annie King says she won't drink the Waikato River water, which was being pumped to Auckland, because people have died in the river. Now, when I say this to engineering students, they smile, you see, because this woman, what right has she got to say this? Well, she has every right to say it. It's how we act upon it that's very, very important, and this is where the ethics begins to come into it. You see, engineers have led this teaching of ethics for a long time because a number of years ago it was mandatory for all engineers under the Washington Accord, which is a huge international umbrella, to have ethics as part of their curriculum. So engineers, whether they like it or not, have to actually sit down and listen to people like me telling them about ethics. Now, I'm not sure of the time, but I do want to point out one thing. I do not teach ethics. There's a Jesuit, I can't think of his name, but he said that give me a child by the age of 7 and he's mine till the end of life. Who was that? It was it? Okay. So the important thing about that is that I believe by the time I get them when they're in their 20s, it's too late for me to change their morality. All I want to do is to actually give them the chance to think a bit laterally about their decisions and to give them some mental constructs or frameworks in which they can do these things. We talked before about whether we should ever say what we think is the right answer. And I tend to be very reluctant to give that to students, especially senior students and postgrads. In an ideal world, all decisions made in the society would be unanimous, but whose values should take precedence? What if compromise is not acceptable? Is there a problem? Are scientists, that's us, are we part of the problem? Now here's what Cartwright said. Now Cartwright is a professor of business, and he's involved in this wonderful oxymoron called business ethics. And he said, promotion of GM food was one of the most disastrous scientific campaigns ever. And that the current debacle in genetic engineering is the result of the ethical arrogance of us as scientists. So it's all our fault. Nothing to do with business at all. So how do we as scientists and engineers, technologists, establish this framework through which we can address our options? What should we or what can we do? Is that enough? What about this? What about registration? What about education? Well, we can't do everything. I can't. What I've really been very interested in is the last one, education and the options that gives us. For example, mandatory continuing professional development, and of course inclusion of ethics in all professional curricula. Now you say, why does professional curricula? Well, you've got to start somewhere, and I think the professions are well established as being a group that do take responsibility for things. They are the ones that society tends to look up to. So if we get rid of all that lot, we're somewhere down the track to doing something sensible. So what should be in the curriculum? Well, again, I'll push this very quickly so I don't upset Darryl too much. But those are the things that I believe should be in it. Now, I've written more on this, but there's no point in going into it except for the last bit. I do it as a sandwich course. And the really interesting thing is that the assessment of themselves is done by the students. Now, it was 100% student assessed. And we did it the first year because they thought it would be a good idea. Then we had a deputation from the student union saying, we do not want to have other students assessing us. We want you to do it. So the compromise, the ethical compromise, was for me to say 50-50. So that's the way we do it now. And the course has been running now for about 10 years in Germany, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway has just recently joined with us as part of this group. So will they affect academic freedom if we do these sort of things, if we have compulsory education in ethics and so on? Yes. But is this alternative, environmental degradation, another option we have to look at? The final thing I want to give you is this code, which I call the 4 E's. And my engineering students love it because without the 4 E's, we should not proceed. Let's see what they are, just very quickly. There are 4 slices of the pie. The first one is it ethical? Now, by ethical, I put everything in, to do with culture, society, the whole lot. That's the first E. Then the environmental, to do with the ecology and the environment. Then economic, and here's the one that engineers love. Can we do it technically? So many things we start off in my part of the world that have been built and developed, and it falls over at the last minute because of technology. All of those 4 E's need to be addressed in reasonable proportions in order for sustainability to be implemented. Finally, we've only got one of these. You know, as a scientist and engineer, I know that we've been looking, but we have not found any others, so we've got to look after it. One of my middle names is Stuart. Now, Stuart actually means High Steward. There was a High Steward of Scotland, and I might later on tell you more about that. But stewardship, or in Maori, kaitiakatanga, is to look after the environment, to nurture it. That's what we must be doing, and that must be the bottom line, the essence of bioethics. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So maybe I'll immediately make a comment about the process in April 2004, because I also was there, and I remember very clearly how upset you were. And I'm also on the IUBS Bioethics Committee, so we also were involved in that. I was actually at the UNESCO meeting that John talked about, representing United Nations University, who also had the same opinion that environmental ethics should be part of the declaration. What happened in the IBC is, I think maybe half of the national bioethics committees shared the view that environmental ethics should be, and half did not. What happened is they thought they would promote a separate declaration on environmental ethics for Commerce, and Bangkok is going to be remembered for the Commerce meeting that was held in March this year. And in a closed session of Commerce that happened here in Bangkok, and the report will be available soon, some members of Commerce decided they didn't agree with having a declaration on environmental ethics right now, and that recommendation went to the executive board, and it's been postponed for another couple of years. So that's partly as a recommendation of the Commerce itself, which was rather sad. I think, in fact, some of the people who didn't understand what they were recommending and the consequences that it would have inside the Commerce. But it's
had enormous consequences because we haven't actually gone on ahead. We're still sitting around on our hands. If we had done something then, we would have been 12 months ahead. Now we're 12 months behind.
Yes, well, as a member of the IBC in 93 to 1998, some of the things we wanted to be done are still not done. And this is a problem. But some did happen, they just took some time. It's a very frustrating process, so.
Yes, I suppose in one sense, things go awry when good women and good men do nothing. So we've got to make sure we do the right thing.
There's time for one question. Lady in the front, please. Use the microphone, please.
All the courses are evaluated. And it's done, of course, anonymously, and we get feedback. If you're really interested, I can send you papers that have been published on it.
Because I come from a college where we run medical ethics as a course for the past 20 years, and we don't have an evaluation system. So what happens is only at the end of the course, and when they're interns, they apply what they have studied. But as such, there is no evaluation system. So that's why I was interested in whether you have a system.
Oh, you've got to have an evaluation system. I mean, two things. So that obviously makes the students feel that, that their voice is being heard, but it also makes me respond in a different way, because I never do the same thing the next year around. I'm always, I believe, improving. Some of my students may not say so, but I think I am. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, John. So it's a very good presentation. So we're going to the last paper before morning, afternoon tea. Afternoon tea. Sorry, it's grey goo already. Is because somebody of a schedule of one of the presenters in the next session. Of a paper that from Siripin from Thailand, the conception, risk and decision making, is going to be moved forward, and our presentator is Ekwin Kobachan. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. There are some problems. Dr. Siripen can't come to present her paper today, so I come instead. I will read Dr. Siripen's paper and keep some question and comment to Dr. Siripen only. Conception of risk in decision making. Because of empty risk society is impossible, the issue about acceptable risk are widely debated in decision making this session. One of main queries in their controversies is who's define risk. In their book, Understanding Risk, Informing Decision in a Democratic Society, a committee on risk characterization of U.S. National Research Council proposed the risk characterization should not be conceived as a summary or translation of the result of technological analysis. Instead, it should be conceived as an output of the interactive analytic deliberative process organized by 7 principles as following. 1. Risk characterization should be a decision-driven activity directed toward informing choice and solving problems. 2. Copying this situation requires a broad understanding of the relevant rules, harms, or consequences to the interested and affected parties. 3.